welcome. You're watching the B-School budget on NDTV. In the run-up to the budget, we're trying to get a sense of what young India really wants the finance minister to do. Today, we're coming to you from the International Management Institute, or I, here in New Delhi, where students will be laying out their aspirations, their expectations from the budget, and of course, quizzing our panelists. We have got a fantastic panel of guests here to talk about what can we realistically expect from the budget. Joining us today, Sumant Sinha, Chairman of ReNew Power, Mr. Gurcharan Das, well-known business expert and author of India Grows at Night When the Government Sleeps. Dr. Bakul Dholakia, again, well-known business expert and Director General of IMI, and Abhik Barua, Chief Economist of HDFC Bank. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us here. I'm going to straight away go to the questions because we've got a lot of students with exciting questions. Go ahead, ask your question.
I want to ask that the moment BJP government took the charge, our Prime Minister said that he want to improve our ranking in terms of ease of doing business. And recently, Mr. Deepak Parekh made a comment that there has been no improvement in terms of ease of doing business. So I want to ask the panel that what is their viewpoint on this comment made by Deepak Parekh?
Great question. Mr. Gurcharan Das, would you like to take that?
It is a very good question. I personally think Deepak is being impatient. I think it takes time for these things, and the action is in the states. So the center, the group that is working on the ease of doing business is doing a tremendous job. This e-biz portal that came up yesterday was something very, very significant because now it will be easier to put all your approvals are online and on one portal, and your clearances will be online.
Sumant Sinha, as someone who represents the industry here, would you agree with the fact that Mr. Parekh says that there's been no systemic change on the ground, or would you go with the view that the industry is being a little impatient right now?
No, I think the truth, as it always does, lies somewhere in between. I think there is a lot of expectation, particularly after the promises made by this government and the continued assertions made by the government. And I think when you actually get down to the day-to-day issues of doing business, yeah, there hasn't been that much change in reality. But I do agree with Gurcharan that these things take time to change.
How much time would you give this government? Would you wait a year? Would you wait for the budget? And the importance of the budget, that's why.
See, I think, Shweta, if you look at NDA 1, for example, it took them almost 3 or 4 years of hard slog on the reforms front before we saw the benefits of that, then starting in 2003 to 2009. So, but it took them 4 years of effort. I don't think we can expect this government, therefore, to start delivering within 9 months of having taken part.
So you're okay to be patient because we're waiting for corporate India to open up their purse strings.
Frankly, Shweta, I don't want to be patient as well. I mean, I'm in the camp of all the young people here.
Right.
We all don't have time. We all want to get things moving faster.
Right.
So we would like everything to change on a dime and really go much faster. But I think, having said all of that, one can see that the government is making the right noises and taking the right steps. And I think it will start manifesting itself in the next year or two.
Sure. Interesting questions here, even on oil prices and others. Yeah, go ahead. Ask the question.
The oil prices are expected to go down further at around $30 per barrel. How do you see it impacting the economy and the policy in the budgets?
I think there was a similar question here on this government being lucky. Who's asking? Yeah.
My question is that we're improving a lot on the economic indicators. So is it because we have substance in the policy, or is it because of some global economic factors that are affecting?
Abhik, would you like to take that first? On oil prices going down to $30 a barrel, is that a reality, and how will it impact India?
I'm not too sure of that. I'm certainly not going to punt on oil prices, but I think there are two ways of looking at oil prices. One, it's certainly for a commodity importer and an oil importer like India. It certainly, brings windfall gains and improves the fiscal situation because we have to pay less out in terms of subsidies, etc., etc. But the other, you have to also look at what the decline in oil prices, this very sharp fall in oil prices, is a symptom of. And it's a symptom of a slowing global economy, a global economy which picked up for a bit and has started slowing again. And the big worry, sort of point of worry, is China. So there is a positive and a negative to the oil price story.
Dr. Dholakia, would you like to comment on the fact that a lot of people are saying this government has also been lucky? The kind of unprecedented crash we saw in oil prices couldn't have come at a better time for this government.
True. But then every leader brings luck with him or her.
Right.
There are two aspects to this. And very often we are confused as to whether a very sharp decline in oil prices is a positive indicator or a negative indicator. Because while it may reduce your current account deficit in terms of the import costs,
Sure.
it could also compromise on your export markets if the relevant countries where you are selling, and now look east is the policy that you are following.
Right.
It could also impair foreign investments because of the investment surpluses that arise in those countries. From the budgetary point of view,
It's fantastic.
it's a very positive thing.
Right.
Because it helps you to reduce oil subsidy without actually doing much.
The current account deficit in many ways taken care of with what we saw happen this financial year with oil prices crashing, but the fiscal deficit continues to be a worry. And the one question, of course, on everyone's mind is how does he prune expenditure? Which are the social sector schemes that need to be curtailed? How much should he allocate to key priority sectors, healthcare, defense, education? We've got some questions there coming up on spending, and go ahead, ask your question.
We have heard that the central government is planning on slashing its contribution towards social welfare schemes and is planning to empower the state government more. Would the state governments be able to take up the responsibility, or will that be a justifiable move?
Center-state relations, interesting question. I'll just quickly take the question on healthcare, defense, education, or somebody here. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is that India spends most of its defense requirements, gets the money through imports, estimated around 130 billions, I suppose. So how is the government going to meet this massive requirement?
Any other questions on spending and priority sector, social sector? Yeah. Okay.
We have not been putting a lot of money for education these days. Should we expect the new budget to put a lot of importance on education, because skill development is what we need for Make in India to you get successfully rolling?
All right. If we could get each of you to answer that. Yeah, Mr. Das. Go ahead.
Well, take education very quickly.
Right.
It's not a question of money. That is a lie. The reality is there's enough money that has been poured into, let's begin with primary education. The primary education with Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, etc. over the years, that we've done a good job. But the worst thing is that a lot of the money is just wasted. Nobody measures outcomes. Right. It's all about inputs and nothing about outcomes. Well, these things are related to the budget.
Okay, Sumant, social sector spending is something which always is talked about ahead of the budget. This government also has the dilemma on one hand to prune expenditure to meet the fiscal deficit target. On the other hand, there's also many economists now pointing out that, public spending should be stepped up, especially in areas like infrastructure, because that is what will get the economy kick-started at a time when corporate India is not spending. Your thoughts?
No, so I think as far as social sector spending is concerned, the government really has as far as I can see, two fundamental strategies. One is, of course, with all this Aadhaar and Jan Dhan Yojana having come into place now, to actually do direct cash transfers, right? And thereby actually improve the outcomes, actually put money where it needs to get to, without all the intermediaries sort of siphoning it off, and therefore have better efficiency of that money being spent. Sure. So, and that's one big strategy that they're following. The second thing that they're doing also is that they're actually going to take away a lot of these central government-driven schemes, and actually they're going to let the states decide how much they want to spend across different schemes. Truly much more federal in that sense.
Shweta, if I could just come in on this. I'm sorry, Sumant, I didn't let you finish.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I think there is a mistaken notion that, all spending, government spending, including investment spending, is funded from the budget.
Right.
A large part of the funding for government programs, particularly through the PSUs, comes from outside, what they call the internal and extra budgetary resources. And if you look at the cash positions of a number of large PSUs, they are very comfortable. So I think there are two routes. Sitting on piles of cash.
So you're saying that needs to be unlocked.
Either they give it to the government,
right.
either they invest, or give it to the government as dividends.
But if I can make a point on that,
yeah,
I think the important thing is that the government has to improve the actual economic outlook in different sectors. Right. Because unless they do that, and unless capital can actually generate some returns, there is no point in just pumping, whether it's public capital or private capital hardly matters at some level.
Right.
The key missing point, both in the previous government as well as in this government, is the importance of selling the reforms to the people.
I would just like to flip that question. Many actually believe this government has oversold and they're not walking the talk.
No, not at all. Not at all. Because why would, Kejriwal wouldn't have got elected. He wants to take India back to a 1991 India, a pre-reform India. He would not have been elected if the reformers had sold reforms.
At the same time, Dr. Bakul Dalokia, we've got this government worried about what happened in Delhi. Do you see the Delhi defeat for the BJP in many ways showing up in the budget? Are we going to see a more populist budget because of that? And is that a real concern?
Well, if that happens, it would be a nightmare. The whole thing is that one was expecting that after many years, for the first time, we are heading for a proper budget which has the minimum quotient of populism. Because presenting a populist budget now
will be a disaster.
At the beginning of a long tenure would be a disaster. There are a lot of things to be done in terms of interministerial coordination, rationalization of expenditure. The Expenditure Reforms Commission would make very valuable recommendations. All of this, I hope, initial steps towards implementation, not constitution of more committees that will look at these things.
So we want to see real implementation.
Action. We want to see action.
Quick word.
I'm going to be a little pedantic and add something to what Sumant mentioned. I think there are two themes as far as public investment spending is concerned. One is to transfer more to the states. The other, I think, is a fairly categorical acceptance of the fact that the PPP model that we sort of kept touting for every infrastructure project that we conceived of has failed. And I just hope the new budget at least introduces a new template or a blueprint
for public-private partnership.
Kind of partnership.
We'll quickly take one or two more questions. I'm running out of time. Yeah, go ahead.
My question is on Make in India. If we want to make in India a prospect, we need to improve our infrastructure. But I would like to quote Arundhati Bhattacharya, the SBI chairman. She said that our banks are not big enough to fund those infrastructure things. So are we looking forward to merging of some public sector banks together so that it becomes big enough to actually fund those infrastructure projects?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
There had been certain apprehension that in order to rush into Make in India, would they take steps in hiking the import duty for this in this budget so that just to take more of a populist route which will hurt the economy as such?
Interesting question there. If Abhik, you could quickly take that. What kind of incentives can we expect to push forward the Make in India theme?
Well, I mean, there could be tax incentives of various kinds, but we also need the money. So the question that he raised of putting a cess on certain duties, on taxes and so on, certainly remains an option. They have to show us the money. I mean, they can't just come up
What is most widely expected is that in the oil sector, you require stabilization. Right. Because it is not necessary that the prices will continue to fall. And therefore, manipulating the customs or excise duties in order to kind of create a stabilization kind of fund is something that can happen.
No, if I can just add to Abhik's point, it's not just a question of show me the money. It's also a question of show me the market. Because if we don't see the market, then nobody's going to invest actually. So I think it's very important to, for example, in defense, they're trying to create that market. In solar manufacturing, for example, they're trying to create the market. But at the same time...
So you're saying demand is an issue right now?
Demand is... See, the thing is that if you start manufacturing in India, in a number of cases, costs go up. So the government has caught in this bind between costs going up versus manufacturing in India.
This government has put a lot of thrust on disinvestment. So I read recently, it was in media that we can't sell gold for buying grocery. So what is the panel's take on it?
So my question is that there's one school of thought on the center which is clearly pro-development. And then looking at the recent Delhi elections, this school of thought is towards eliminating corruption. Now each school of thought will have a significant impact on the budget. So according to you, what's more important right now? Eliminating corruption or just focusing on pro-development?
Okay, one last question. Yeah, go ahead because we'll take closing comments then.
So what time frame would you give to this government wherein we can see these policies actually trickling down to the bottommost level, some relief for the poor, and for students as like us, we have better prospects, job prospects?
Okay, better job prospects, important question coming from students. Last question there, yeah.
I'd like to know the panel's view on the industry bodies urging the government to reduce MAT rates as well as the inverted duty structure.
Okay, Sumant, would you like to take on MAT? And if each of you could, as part of your closing comments, really some of these concerns of students.
Well, you know, MAT is, we don't like MAT to go down, right? Because obviously it brings our costs down, it improves the margins, it makes a better investment case and therefore hopefully creates more jobs in the long run. So it's a bit of a difficult thing for the government. If they reduce MAT, obviously it reduces, impacts the fiscal deficit right now. So I don't know how the government is going to think about it. They might just reduce MAT for certain chosen sectors. For example, perhaps infrastructure sectors to give that kickstart to infrastructure.
Or at least correct the inverted duty
And of
structure.
course, they have to correct the inverted duty structure. Otherwise, Make in India is never going to take off.
On this investment, I think if this government has to be criticized, it is that they had the opportunity for 9 months to disinvest. And they just kept delaying it. So I would hope this investment is very important. And when we were talking about banking, etc., I just hope they have the guts to bring down a few banks below 50%. On corruption, very quickly, corruption, again, as I said, he's lucky. There's been no corruption scandal. But that's not how you fight corruption. You fight corruption through institutional reform.
But a quick word there on Leakgate, what people are calling it, the fact that there's a huge crackdown now on documents of the oil ministry. The impression really being sent out that this government is willing to take on large industrial houses.
Yeah, but that's one sort of investigation, etc. I mean, that's not really significant. Okay. What is significant is to change the rules by which the government runs itself.
Dr. Dhalakia.
Yeah, I think in tackling the issue of corruption, we need to clearly distinguish between the petty corruption. The systems and structures required to deal with that problem is very different from what I would call the big ticket corruption issues, which is at a very, very, very different level. And the big ticket corruption cannot be removed unless all ad hocism and discretion in allocation of all kinds of resources that the government has the ownership is totally removed.
Room in the budget to do any of that? To bring in that transparency?
Well, yes, you can set the ball rolling with an institutional mechanism for that particular purpose.
Right. So that's a classic example. Right, and Obik, the success of the coal auction in many ways also pointing to the fact that transparency brings in revenues.
Yes, it does, but I think there are lingering questions as to whether some of the companies overpaid for these blocks.
Of course.
And what their situation is likely to be a couple of years down the road, or whether we are, suppressing inflation by selling coal at inflated prices. But that's not an issue that I'd like to go into. What I'd like to address is something that is hopefully close to the students' heart as to how the economy is likely to transform, how the government wants the economy to transform,
and creation
the kind of jobs
Absolutely.
that they should be looking for. And whenever I give pre-placement talks at IMI, and everyone wants an investment banking job, I think you should sort of get out of that mindset. I think we are moving towards, we are trying to move towards a more manufacturing-oriented economy, and that's really where the action is.
But I think the problem is that the manufacturing jobs are not fashionable, not simply because they involve a lot more action on the ground, but they are also not because manufacturing sector cannot bear the brunt of high wages and high salaries at this particular.
But can he do something to change that?
Go for defense.
Okay.
If you want a job, that is the hottest sector for the next 5 years.
No, I would beg to disagree. I think it's clean energy.
Clean energy. Okay. So we can actually close the show on that note. Plenty more exciting sectors coming up. It's an economy that has a huge potential. It's an economy that's changing rapidly. But the real acid test of this government will perhaps be the budget. Can he deliver? What will he do on the 28th? That remains the big question. Thank you all students for joining us and asking wonderful questions, and a big thank you to all our guests for answering those questions. This is Shweta Rajpal Kohli from the IMI campus for NDTV.